Good afternoon. Welcome to the Weekly Livestock Market Update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us is University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
Plenty to talk about as we get into the markets this week, and actually some positive news as we talk about the hog market. But let's recap and start with cattle and see what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, if we start with live cattle prices this week, they were basically unchanged as we went through this week. Feeder cattle prices were steady to $5 higher. I think the tumble that we saw in terms of corn futures prices helped give some strength to those feeder cattle futures. If we look at that choice box beef price this week, it was down a little more than $4 this week. We really had weakness across the board in all of the components that make up that choice box beef price. On the other side of the ledger, if we look at the pork side, Barrow and gilt prices were about $4 higher this week. It's good that we can report some higher prices after what was several weeks of trending lower. That October lean hog futures contract was up $1.05 this week, while the pork cutout value was also higher this week, up more than $2.25, with strength across the board in all those components, but certainly pork bellies being up over $6 for the week was helpful.
I think we have to talk about some of maybe those contributing factors helping find some support on the hog side of things. You have Hurricane Florence, which I'm experiencing currently in North Carolina, and additional cases and more development of African swine fever, not only in China, but they found a case in Belgium this week as well.
Yeah, that's correct. That case in Belgium, although a single case, we have to remind ourselves that the EU certainly can be major exporters of pork into world markets. If they were to see a major outbreak of African swine fever, perhaps a number of countries, Asia countries in particular, would potentially no longer take pork from the EU. And I think that is positive for the United States. And you are correct, as Hurricane Florence bears down on your part of the country. We have seen plants that have closed in response to that. Smithfield's closed its plant in Tar Heel, North Carolina. We also talk about Clinton, South Carolina facility that's closed as well. So certainly causing some disruption in terms of slaughter capacity here late in the week.
Do we also, though, get a little nervous on the flip side of that as we look at hog weights? We already saw a jump this week. But if you're talking, we know those plants are shut down through the remainder of this week, but power issues and really getting them back online, depending on damage, could really push those hog weights even higher.
Yeah, I think if you looked at where we were in those futures contracts during the week, and I would say much of that was on the concern that as plants shut down as a result of the hurricane, that we were going to back some hogs up and get some heavier weights. It's really the news later in the week of African swine fever expanding both in China as well as seeing that case in Belgium that I think helped strengthen us late in the week.
I think we need to talk a little WASDE as we take a look at that. Really some good news, though, not necessarily for row crop producers, but for livestock producers to see input costs maybe drop down a little bit heading in to the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at what we got out of USDA's report this month, a corn yield of 181.3, which is nearly 3 bushels higher than where they suggested in August, suggests we are growing that corn crop still. I think production up about 240 million bushels relative to where they were in August. That 181.3 would be a record corn yield for the United States. Even on the soybean side, soybean yields, USDA had up more than a bushel an acre from where they estimated them in August, coming in at 52.8, which would also, I think, be a record yield on the soybean side of the equation as well. So record corn and soybean crops, certainly helpful from a feed cost side. And you can see that in that WASDE report as the corn midpoint was dropped by 10 cents relative to August. And if we look at soybeans down 30 cents in terms of that midpoint estimate, even soybean meal down $5 a ton from August to September tells us that we are talking about some cheaper feed costs, which come at a time when lower livestock prices, hog and cattle prices make that welcome news.
Especially after taking a look and looking into the ISU's farrow to finish returns, we really need to see feed costs drop as much as possible for the livestock producers.
Yes, we did get that information out. And for August, Iowa State University estimates a loss of nearly $41 a head in terms of what's been happening on the pork side of the equation. A lot of that does have to do with just how much hog prices have been dropping, and that's beginning to be reflected in those return estimates from Iowa State. Thank goodness feed costs are staying low as of right now, because otherwise I think we'd be running much stronger red ink than even we are now. And if you look at where that $41 loss equates, we haven't been there since late 2012, early 2013. So a much different picture has unfolded in the pork industry as we've gone through this year.
And really, Scott, it seems like it didn't take it long. We talked a lot about profits and how things look good for producers a year ago, and it's a complete 180 from that conversation.
Yeah, there's sometimes I would suggest that demand for whether it's live cattle or live hogs, either one, has become much more inelastic. So it doesn't take much of a supply change to potentially really get big swings in prices. And we've just seen a lot of things happen in hogs in particular, whether it's export markets that have larger tariffs against our products, or even in some cases maybe pushing a lot of pork on domestic markets that have created what's much lower farm prices for us.
We talk a lot about global demand, but we're going to focus more so today on domestic demand. Let's talk a little consumer confidence and some more good news from that report.
Absolutely. We got a lot of good news out of that consumer confidence report that came out today. Month over month, up nearly 5% on September versus August. It's also about a 6% increase over a year ago for September of this year relative to a year ago level. So really strong news out of that overall index. If you look just for a minute at that index of consumer expectations, it was up 4.6% month over month, up 7.9% relative to a year ago. It's at the highest level we've seen since September of 2004. So it's been a long time since we've been in this range. So a lot of expectations built up in that consumer sentiment index as you see unemployment rates continuing to be low and moving lower, and also some additional income streams starting to flow. I think there's a lot of expectations out of consumers that drove that index higher.
Does it help us when it comes to the retail side of things, especially when we're looking at the retail prices that came out this week?
Yeah, so I think it only confirms when we look at consumer confidence why we see some of the information we do out of the retail prices that were released for August this week. If we start on the pork side, that retail pork price grew by 8.6% in August. That moves it to $3.82. Now, that's still 12 cents below a year ago level, but just a little bit of longer term comparison here for a minute. If you look at August 2015 versus August of 2018, we're to 0.5% lower than they were in August of 2015. That's frankly quite astounding when you realize that we were 9% higher on pork production will be 9% higher this year relative to 2015. Strong domestic demand has to be at play for that kind of scenario to play out. And even on the beef side, so choice retail beef prices were up 6 cents again this month, $6.08 a pound for the level. They're actually above year ago levels by 11 cents. If you do that same 2015 to 2018 comparison, yes, retail beef prices are down nearly 4%. But we've seen production that's going to be 14% higher this year relative to where we were in 2005. And again, I go strong demand, certainly has been at play. Just take the other side for a minute. We look at those chicken breast prices that we're now seeing out of that report. They're at the lowest level we've ever seen since the report started back in 2006. So sometimes reminds me that domestic demand and strength in domestic demand is certainly important to where retail prices go.
Scott, when we look at something like chicken breast at that low of a level, does it give beef and pork a little bit more competition at the meat case, not necessarily in terms of flavor, but more so in terms of budget-friendly purchases as we're looking at making those weekly meat purchases?
So yes, I think that we do get substitution occurring, and as you get chicken breast prices as low as they are, it becomes more of a substitute than maybe we might talk about at other times. However, I'd make the case that when you just see how strong the economy's been, that folks right now don't have to buy down, and they're more apt to go ahead and make that pork or beef purchase relative to chicken. If we were to talk about an economic slowdown in this country, that's the scenario for me that actually then says consumers start to drive a lot harder towards things like chicken breast as an alternative to try to keep those budgets somewhat aligned.
All right, Scott, anything else this week?
I think we've covered the major issues.
As we look ahead to next week, some big reports coming out and plenty for us to talk about next Friday.
Absolutely. We're going to get cattle on feed out next Friday. It will be interesting to see what kind of information comes out of the next cattle on feed report. And we'll also get a shot of livestock slaughter on Thursday of next week.
All right, to have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. You can click subscribe. You can also submit questions and comments there as well. And for market updates twice daily, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner on Brownfield.